Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I'm delighted to be joined by Mike Fitzmaurice, Chief Evangelist and VP North America for WEBCON, who will be talking to you today about stage-based workflows, a better way to model and manage processes. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC19. Don't forget to check out the Resource Center. This is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit SharePointEurope.com and click the content link at the top. ESPC 19 team discounts allow you to book 4 tickets and receive your 5th ticket free. That's a huge 20% discount worth up to €1,795. For a huge amount of team learning and development, join the best SharePoint Office 365 and Azure practitioners in the world in Prague this December and go to the next level faster. Simply visit SharePointEurope.com for further details. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have for Mike in the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded, where you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Mike Fitzmaurice. Hello, Mike.
Good morning. Well, it's morning for me. It's greetings from Seattle, where it's about 4 o'clock in the morning. This is okay. Working across time zones is part of the job. What time is it there, Shane?
In Ireland, where we're based, it's just gone midday, but in Central European, it's 1 o'clock. It's
1
lunchtime.
o'clock. It's a fine time for pretty much everyone else but me, basically. Okay, well, no, this is good. You're seeing my screen, I think. So
Yeah.
let's get busy. We've got a fair amount to talk about today. Look, this is it's a branded presentation. It's a sponsored presentation, and the slides are branded. But I've said this for many, many years at many, many companies. I don't sell products. I do sell ideas, though. This is advice I think you can use no matter which product you choose to use. This is something I've believed for a very long time, even going back to the days when I was in the SharePoint team at Microsoft. This is all about stage-based workflows, or if you prefer, we could call it state machine logic. It's just a better, in fact, this is a session, I've delivered this as a session at past ESPCs. This is a better way, this is updated content, of course, it's not exactly the same, quite a bit different actually, but this is a better way, Shane, and everyone else out there to model and manage business processes. So my name is Mike Fitzmaurice, and well, let's see, actually, here, very quickly about me. And if you have no idea who I am, but you've been kind enough to tune in, I very much appreciate that. But here, a little bit about me. This is what I look like. We're not doing video. It's 4 in the morning. I don't look very nice at the moment. I have bad hair. But, and if you like to remember me as an avatar, that's the one I use most of the time. My name is Mike Fitzmaurice. That's how you spell it. And Fitzmaurice is how you pronounce it. Americans seem to have trouble with it. So my preferred pronouns, he and him. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, look, there are multiple ways. If you'd like to get in touch with me with respect to WEBCON, that's the preferred email for me. If you just have a question and you wanted to contact me personally, that's my email address. And this is how to reach me on Twitter if you want to direct message me there. I'm the original SharePoint evangelist. My involvement with SharePoint predates it being called SharePoint. I was involved up to about halfway through the building of SharePoint 2010. So I kind of know how it was created, why it was created, and once upon a time it was my job to get technical people interested in building on and deploying SharePoint. They did. They told their friends. Lots of things happened. Someone else could have done it. It just happened to have been me. And I was at Microsoft for 11 years, most of that time on SharePoint. 10 years at another workflow company, helping to found it. And then now I'm the Vice President of North America, and it's for WEBCON, and its Chief Evangelist. I've been doing this for a very long time. And towards that end, this is not just me randomly talking about stuff I think is cool. This is based on a ton of experience. So the agenda we're going to talk about today, this is not about how to use any particular workflow tool. As I said, I want to talk about an idea. Yes, I'll tell you right up front, WEBCON BPS does state machines incredibly well. We're not the only people that do state machines. I like our way of doing it best, but I don't care which tool you use. This is a better way about how to model and manage workflows, no matter whose technology you use. And you can probably pull off state machine logic in lots of different ways. This is how to think about workflow. If you're familiar with, say, Power Automate, where it's sort of a linear process, I start, I do this, I do that, and I'm done. That works for a very short time, and then life starts to get a bit more interesting. You'll see in a second. This should apply to a lot of different tools, and it's based on a lot of experience and observations. So let's get on with it. Sequential workflows, which is the default. If you've been working in SharePoint Designer, if you've been working in Power Automate, if you've been using tools like K2, Nintex, things like that, most of them are based on sequential workflow logic. And those get really messy very quickly. Here's an example. I'm going to do a press release. It's a fairly common process. Most companies at one point or another release information to the press, so it's not too industry specific. Everyone should be able to understand it. The idea here is I have an author who is going to draft a press release. I have a manager who is going to review that press release and make sure it does says what we want it to say. There's a legal department that's going to check my work and make certain that I don't say anything that will get us in trouble. And there's a publisher who's going to make sure that it gets published to our website, gets published to a newswire service, and so on and so forth. So those are the four, from authoring through publishing. That's our process. Now, you may think that it works something like this. I'm going to go left to right as opposed to top to bottom, just because we're working off of a PowerPoint slide, and a PowerPoint slide and a screen tends to have more space going left to right. So we start the process. Someone submits something, and then the manager approves it. It's either yes or no. If it's no, we end the process. If it's yes, we continue on. And now the lawyer takes a look at it, and the lawyer has the option to either reject it or approve it. If yes, the publisher deploys it to the public website, and then we're done. Now, I don't hate this, but it's missing a lot because it doesn't really look like this the moment you start thinking about it. Everyone starts thinking about the process like this, but it really shouldn't stay this way. This is a little bit better. Let's begin. We start the workflow by somebody submitting a document, and then the manager gets it, and the manager can approve it, and it'll move on to the lawyer. But the manager could also reject it, in which case it goes back to the author. The reason I like this better is I can track performance and see whether or not we've got issues with how long it takes to get a press release produced and how many drafts we have to go through or how many review cycles we have to go through. In the previous model, which was way too simple, it could be the same press release goes through 5 or 6 review processes, and we wouldn't be able to capture that too easily. Here, we get to see the entire thing from start to finish. We don't let go of it till it's done. So at this point, the author can has the option to revise it, and they actually have the option to say, no, I give up, in which case that could have an effect on both the process and their career, but that option exists. We had to model it. Now, typically they'll make revisions and then resubmit them. And the lawyer, by the way, has the same option. So she can send that back to the author with proposed changes and so on. And again, we start the cycle again. If, however, the lawyer's happy, then we move on to the publisher and we move on. Now, this is starting to get a little convoluted, a little bit hard to read. And we can make it messier. I can add an extra person into this process to do a professional editorial review. That creates more and more steps. I could give the lawyer more options than just yes or no. I could give them the option to have a question, for example, for management. This is going to get ugly unless we rethink it. So how about this instead? How about we treat the press release like a document that's being passed around from place to place with the expectation that people are doing different things to it, which is kind of like real life. So it's with the author, with the manager, with the legal department, or with the publisher. And at each of these stages, the person in question is faced with some options. And depending on what they choose, we go to a different place. So if the manager gets it, when we start the process, it actually gets it. Remember, it's being composed in a separate place. When we begin, we hand it to the manager. Manager is asked if it's okay. If it is, it goes on to the legal department. If it is not okay, it goes on to back to the author. Actually, back is a misnomer. There really is no order here. I've laid them out in a way that is pleasing to me, but it doesn't matter if the author step is over here or over here. I like it over here. So it goes back to the author. And then the author can make the changes and resubmit them, and it'll come back to the manager. Or they can refuse to resubmit, and then we end. See? Same thing here. If it goes to legal, legal's got a choice. They either send it back to the author, send it back to the manager with a question, or they move it on to the publisher. We're not going to give the publisher a choice. The publisher just publishes it, and then it's finished. This is a bit easier to read than that previous slide. And we call these stage workflows. And why? Because we think of these as 4 different stages. You could also call it a state machine workflow, but for some reason, the term stage tends to be a bit friendlier to people. You can call them stages, you can call them steps, you can call them states. It's all the same thing. In fact, I need to give you just there are initial payoffs to stage workflows that ought to be obvious even now, not the least of which is instead of the designer determining what you're doing, telling you what to do, the designer's job is to determine what is possible. It's up to the participants to decide what actually happens. So I'm not going to say that I'm not going to force it. One approval by the manager, another approval by legal, and then publishing saying that it finishes the task. I'm going to give them the option to send it back or send it forward or send it back halfway with questions and so on. They determine what they do. In fact, this workflow could last for weeks if it needs to, if it takes a long time to make all the necessary changes. Every execution can take a different path. That's within reason, of course. And it better reflects reality. Yes, I know that the The diagram we were just looking at is a bit odder looking than a start here, finish there. But when you look at what people actually do with a press release, it better reflects what their actual choices are and what can really happen to it. It's not so much a straight production thing, it's a living process, more like a case. More on that in a little bit. Now, I'm going to geek out for just a minute. I'm not going to do it for long, and I hope you bear with me. But there's a computer science term called state machine. It is what we base stage logic on. And uh, this really won't take long, but it really helps if I do this. So what I would like you to think about is when we model workflows in stages, we're thinking about states. And there are just three concepts to get here. There are states, there are events. These are things that cause us to move from state to state. And as we're moving from one state to another, we're in a transition. So states, events, transitions. That's all I need to remember. I'll give you a good example. Let's do a light switch, one that you operate with a pull chain. So the light is off, right? We start with it's in an off state. You pull the chain, and that completes the circuit, and the bulb lights up, and now you're on. And we're going to stay on for, well, until something happens to change that. It's like someone pulling the chain, in which case that causes the circuit to be broken, and then we're in the off state again. So off and on, those are states. And then the act of pulling the chain, that's an event. By the way, the exact same event can have different meanings depending on which state I'm in. It's kind of why I chose a pull chain light switch to illustrate the fact that one event, depending on what state you're in, can have very different implications. And then the last thing is the breaking or the completing of the circuit. Those are transitions. That's what's going on as we move from off to on and on to off. That's it. If you get this, you get state machine logic. We don't have to get fancier than this. Now, keep in mind a couple of things about state machines. First of all, the machine is always in a given state by default, meaning I'm either off or I'm on. We're not, unless we have an event occur to change the state, we will remain in that state forever. And all the work takes place during the transitions. So I am in a neutral place at rest in the off position, or in a neutral place at rest in the on state. I'm going to stay there forever. You're probably thinking, well, what if the bulb burns out? That would be an event, and that would cause us to move from on to off. It's just a different event than someone pulling the chain. But yes, we are at rest until something causes us an event takes place that causes a transition to take place. The work takes place during the transitions. That's it. If you get that, you get state machines. There are some real payoffs, more than just making it a little bit easier to read. It's really easy for users to participate in this. Let me show you what I'm talking about. How easy would it be to ask a lawyer to review this entire thing? I mean, the lawyer gets involved here. She's involved for a few moments to either say no or yes. But in order for me to find out whether or not I modeled her role in all of this correctly, I kind of need to teach her the entire diagram and everybody's role in it. This could be interesting if she's curious about such stuff, or she may find that to be a waste of time. And again, she's likely to comment on what the manager does or what the author does without really knowing what they do. I really want to ask her what her involvement is. Well, if it's the lawyer, why don't I just show the lawyer, when you get a press release, what are your choices? Well, I either like it and I send it on to publishing, or I don't like it, I send it on to the author, or I might have a question and so I send it back to management. Uh, Great. Thank you very much. We're done here. I don't need to get her to learn how to read a process diagram. I can ask her some simple questions, be done very, very quickly. And then I can go over to the author and ask the author, well, when someone hands you back a press release you've been working on, what are your choices? Generally speaking, 99 times out of 100, they're going to make those changes, resubmit them, and it's going to move on to their manager for initial approval. And again, there is the possibility that they've done this 50 times and they say, this is never, no one ever is ever going to be happy with this. I give up. Maybe this starts a new workflow with a different author, or there could be lots of reasons, but whatever it is, it ends. The author can review this pretty easily. Now let's move on. There are payoffs to participation, not the least of which is users, by telling you their stories, teach you what they know. Each user story is a stage. You assemble the stages together and you get a business process. It's that simple. No one, repeat, no one has to learn how to read a BPMN diagram. I mean, if you're really into that, great, do it. But generally speaking, the only people that enjoy reading BPMN diagrams are process professionals. Inevitably, when you want to check in with stakeholders, you need to teach those regular people how to read those things. Nobody wins in this. You do what I'm talking about, and you make the stages out of user stories, everything is really easy to follow because I can focus on a piece of it at a time, and then look, the entire process is just the union of all the stages. They're also really easy to adjust. At WEBCON, we care a lot about change, being able to manage it, assuming that processes change very, very quickly. And in truth, everybody cares about change to some extent. Not everyone implements it as well, but everyone cares about it, I would like to think. It just so happens that if you base your work on stages, change is easier. So here's that process again. This is the one that involves reviewing a press release. I've got, an author, I've got a manager, I've got a legal department, and I've got a publisher. And again, we've walked through this before, but again, I kind of mentioned before that we could make it messier. It could be that the author shouldn't send something straight to the manager. The manager is going to judge the press release on whether it meets our goals, but the manager might not necessarily be really good at editing. I would like to get a professional editor involved. So how about, I really could put this at the end. The order does not matter, but again, let's put it here because it's more convenient and more friendly to read it this way. I'm making a little bit of room, and now I'm going to drop in another stage. This is the editing stage. The editor gets this, decides whether it's okay. If it's okay, it goes on to the manager. If it's not okay, it goes back to the author. The only thing I need to change is right here. See where my pointer is? The author now sends it on to the editor directly instead of sending it to the manager. That's it. I'm just in a major change with minimal disruption. And I could do the same thing if I found out that legal had multiple extra choices. I would just wind up with a different event, them choosing it, and then a different transition to make. That's it. Making changes is really, really easy in the wonderful world of states. I cannot endorse this enough. All right, let's move on. There are payoffs to being updatable, not the least of which are you can have major changes with minimal disruption. The stages are relatively independent. That's why I can make major changes with minimal disruption. And the only thing that needs to change is a little bit of the transition logic. Everybody wins here. The alternative is just plain unpleasant. Here's what I mean by that. If you are not using stages, those diagrams are going to get ugly really quickly because a linear diagram with a lot of go back logic starts to look like spaghetti. It's not fun. Again, and teaching someone how to read the whole thing is not a pleasant experience. You have to think about every possible path in advance if you do it that way, and model it as opposed to just thinking about what are the choices in each place and letting the users figure out what the paths are going to be. Users have no flexibility. They have to go through the linear logic that you set up. And if you deviate from it, well, that's out of scope. Typically what happens in a situation like that is a user thinks of a scenario that you haven't, and changing it is really expensive, so you don't, and they wind up just bypassing this and doing press release reviews over email. Nobody, or maybe over OneDrive, or maybe if we're lucky, SharePoint document libraries. But look, nobody wins this way. We're not in monitoring processes or enforcing processes or making sure work gets done using modeled processes. Nobody wins this way. Stages are good. Without explicit support for stages, in other words, if you're not using software that knows what stages are, you're going to wind up doing a lot of looping. You're going to have a lot of if then else branching, and if there's a switch operator, that'll cut down a little bit on the if then else stuff, or case operator. The diagrams are not going to be very easy to read, but I mean, I could implement, well, I have a diagram for this coming up in a few moments, but without explicit support for stages, you can make it work. But again, it's not going to be pleasant. What shouldn't be stage-based? I mean, I'm talking about this different way of modeling processes, right? Does it fit everything, or are there conditions under which I would still want simple linear logic? Well, I'm here to tell you there's nothing. Everything can be stage-based. Everything. I'll show you. Here's a diagram of that press release. Even if we thought of it as a linear process where nothing ever went backwards or sideways or something like that, I could still model it with the author, the manager, the legal department, and the publisher, and they've only got one choice, which is to review it and send it on. Review it, send it on. Review it, send it on. Publish it, and finish. This by default effectively means the same thing as review, send on, review, send on, review, send on, linear, until you decide that it's not going to be linear. And then I can introduce extra events and extra transition paths. So you can basically achieve sequential logic using stages. It's a better way to be no matter how you do this. Not every implementation of stage logic is equally good. And I've been using simplified diagrams to get ideas across, but it's actually pretty important to show you what's really going on. If you are using something that is focused more on automation as opposed to business process management, you're pretty much going to need to show all the details in your diagrams. So this actually omits a ton of detail. You couldn't actually use this in the real world. I suppose you could do this with Power Automate, but realistically speaking, if you were going to do that, it would look more like this, because I would start with a form. Then I would figure out who someone's manager is, notify the manager of a task, send them to the form basically, wait for them to make a change in that form to record their choice. Then I'd need to go ahead and look at the choice field, see if it's approved, yes or no. Then we do the same thing with the legal department, calculate who the lawyer is, and so on and so forth. So here I'm explicitly showing you every step that we have to attend to. This is why asking a user to look at this kind of makes their head spin. You're generally, if you're doing work on this and you want your stakeholders to see it, I'm willing to bet that a lot of you will go ahead and create something simpler in Visio and show it to them. And I'm willing to bet that that Visio diagram doesn't look too different from a state model. By the way, this state model that I was doing, this omits a lot of detail. Typically, when I see software that sort of implements state logic, what it's really doing is something like this. And some people, actually including myself once upon a time, said that you can achieve state logic using a loop. And so here's what's going on. I do a switch at the top of the loop and check to see what's the current state. The state is a hidden variable. And so if the current state is manager, we drop in here. And then we assign a task to the manager and check their response. And then we say the next stage is going to be legal. We don't make the change right away. We have to finish going through the loop and then go around again and check and see what the value is, and then jump in. And then again, we go. When you choose the next stage, it doesn't take effect right away. We have to finish the loop. And in fact, if we don't choose another stage, we're going to go right up to the top and keep repeating. That's just the way this is, because again, we are emulating stage logic. And if you're using a tool that works this way, this is still much better than modeling it as a sequential process. I mean, if this is your only option, use this option. But ultimately, it's basically a loop. The transitions don't happen right away, and you're still doing more work than you probably need to. And the other thing I wanted to stress is that this isn't even beginning until, outside of this workflow, I've already assigned an author the job of creating the press release. Outside of this diagram, outside of this process, the author has already created the first draft. This workflow doesn't start until I'm ready to get it reviewed. I suppose that's okay, but I kind of like the idea of being able to track the whole thing from start to finish. Oh, by the way, this is kind of assuming that we have some sort of facility for managing tasks. Oh, and don't forget that I do have an extra step here for determining who the lawyer is. All right. If I don't have a higher order task object, in other words, something that automatically takes care of the notification message, and something that automatically takes care of deadlines, and something that automatically takes care of calculating who the manager is, and so on. If I have to make that explicit, this starts to get nastier. So here is here's something a little bit more elaborate. I didn't do it for every step. I didn't do it here or here or here, but just use your imagination. Here I'm assigning a task. I'm notifying the assignee. I'm now waiting for them to respond to it. And then I'm examining what the response is. That's not the easiest thing in the world. This starts to get nasty looking. If you have software that implements state machine logic, a lot of the details are taken care of for you. And even if you have this sort of halfway approach, you still have this notion of a workflow task, which Power Automate has approvals where you can make a single choice. Some other products allow you to have forms dedicated to tasks, and those can have more, you can input things more than just a decision. like throw in some notes and throw in a couple of other things, estimate costs or negotiate the deadline or lots of other things. But yeah, if you were linking together a form with a Power App, for example, and it's the Power App being uh, passed around, then it's going to look more like this. If you were using Power Automate and you're simply using approvals, it'll look more like this, but you won't have as many options in the, you basically get to choose reject approve or reject approve. You'll be able to make a choice. That's about it. If the form needed more than that, then you need to sort of keep a Power App in sync with a Power Automation. Stages, however, really should do more of the work. If you've got software that understands state machines, it can encapsulate those details. So this is a real world stage diagram using software that understands stages. So we're writing it, or it's under management review, or it's under the legal review, or it's under publishing. And if when we're done writing, we submit it, great. If management gets it, it can forward it on to legal or reject it and send it back to the writing stage. When legal's got it, it can either reject it and send it back or forward it and send it to publishing or negotiate with management and send it back just this far. The author, at least when it's with the author, can withdraw it, in which case it's canceled. When the publisher publishes it, it's published. The only thing that, well, there's a little bit of work happening inside of the individual steps. So the work happens in the transitions. When someone clicked on forward, then we're inside of this box for a moment. We have just two particular actions taking place. We calculate who the lawyer is for that department, and then we assign it to somebody, that person. If they chose to reject it, then we assigned it to the author and sent it along. I don't even have the go-to statements. Choosing the identity of the task assignee is about it, but the logic of moving it from one state to another, I don't need to do that. It's built into the software. It will take care of moving us to a different state, and we'll do it immediately. So really the only thing I had to do is determine the identity of who's going to get this when we arrive at this state. That's it. It's not that hard. You can read this. It's not particularly complicated. And if we really, really, really want to get fancy, and at some point we kind of want to, we wouldn't equate a state or a stage with a role. If we really wanted to get fancy about it, we would note that at different stages, different roles have different or can trigger different events. So when this is moving from the authoring during, an author does most of the writing, they submit or withdraw. But and when it's with management, they approve or reject it. When it's with legal, they approve or reject it or negotiate it. And when, again, publisher, you can just publish it. But it turns out that even when it's moved on to the legal department's review, the manager still has the right to cancel the whole process. And the author still has the right to withdraw their draft. They may want to pull it back and work on it and then send it back out. In fact, even when the manager's got it, the author could pull it back in theory. In the real world, that's exactly what I would do. So if you think this through this way, this would be a diagram where I've gone ahead and in a different color, red in this particular diagram, I've shown the stuff in black is the path we expect everything to take. But the sort of non-standard transitions, those are in red, meaning that at any point, someone could withdraw or cancel it and take it away. And if I'm really clever about it, I will make sure that only, like when we're in the legal review stage, only the author sees the option to withdraw and only the manager sees the option to cancel. And in fact, the management does not see approve and negotiate and reject at this point. Different people playing different roles have different choices. Not a thing wrong with that, quite a lot right with it. The ramifications of this, they're pretty big. Essentially, this is not going to work unless you have a user interface that can adapt to the stage and the role. Because when we do this, we get to the legal review. I'm not going to create, I suppose I could, one form and one task that's sent to the legal department, and then a different task that's sent to management saying, do you want to reject it or do you want to cancel the whole thing? No, if management wants to cancel this, they need to go to the work in progress and say cancel it. It's an exception condition. It's not part of the normal assignment. So I'm expecting legal to be assigned a task. Management can go find it and cancel it if they want to, but I'm not going to clutter up management's inbox with task assignment after task assignment as this keeps moving. So one needs to be a bit more clever about that. The user interface just needs to be a bit more aware of what state you're in and who the user is. A couple other key things. There's no concept of waiting unless you had a timer event somewhere. Let me go back again. I don't submit this and wait for the management review to finish. I will happily stay here at rest in management review land until the manager clicks on approve or reject. If I want there to be a deadline here, I need a third event called timeout. And timeout is going to determine what happens next. Maybe if we timeout, it automatically gets approved or automatically gets rejected, or we get fancy and decide to do something else with it. In a state machine world with stage logic, you can have timeouts, but timeouts are actual events. If we don't do anything, we are happily staying put in this stage until something causes us to be disrupted. So I don't have to, I'm not waiting, but there are some real payoffs to that. You see, this is great for long running processes. We can run more than 30 days. We can run more than 90 days. We can run for 30 years if we have to, because again, there's nothing in a queue waiting to execute the next instruction. You register to be awakened when an event takes place, and then you check and see what your choices are, and you do them. Restarting, you can think in terms of restart if you want to, but really all restarting is move from my current stage back to the stage I think of as the beginning. Restarting doesn't derail the current process and then create a new one. Restarting just means move from this stage to another stage. I don't have to lose any of my history, any of my audit trail when I want to do what I think of as restarting. Audit trails become very important, but audit trails also become very automatic because when I move from one stage to another, that's an easy thing to log, and it's also an easy thing to show in a report. And I don't really need a high-level map diagram. I don't need to trot out Visio or something else. You're able to look at that other diagram that I have on the previous slide and read it pretty easily. The busy work, like figuring out who is a role occupant and making sure we assign it to them, those are implementation details inside of the stages. The stage diagram is pretty easy to read. Anything is possible this way. There's a real payoff to it. Okay. And this enables something that you might have heard of in the past. If you haven't, it's certainly worth thinking about. There's something called case management. And case management is essentially taking stage logic and content management, creating a case file or a case folder or a case site, whatever you want to call it, a place to put the stuff you're working with, an audit trail so that you know what's been done so far, and the element of collaboration. So in this case file, I've got a group of people that are able to work on that case. We'll keep track of what they do and we'll guide them as they move through different stages or give them different options. So essentially, you could have a case like a press release, and there's the content. I will audit what happens to it, but the people collaborating on it pass it around from stage to stage. That's case management. There's more to it than that, but you get the basic gist of it that way. Case management depends on stage logic. And treating almost everything like a case actually has some pretty strong payoffs. You keep everything together so that people can see everything they might need to work with. And you give them the choice as to what happens next. Again, case management and stage logic have a lot in common. All right, who can do this? Who's good at doing stages? I mean, yeah, look, there's the logo. I'm going to end by saying that WEBCON does it, and they do. We do. But look, if you want stage logic, you actually, ironically, had a pretty decent implementation of it in SharePoint Designer, at least the 2013 and 2016 versions. This still works in 2019 and still works in SharePoint Online. It's out of fashion and probably should be because the engine is an old school type thing. But yeah, there was the notion of moving from one stage to another and having transitions that move between them. So this has been thought of before. And in Windows Workflow Foundation, at least if you were developing in Visual Studio, there was a linear or sequential workflow pattern, and there was a state machine pattern. The latter was actually quite popular, although at that point you were kind of doing development. This is a business process flow. If you aren't familiar with it, and I apologize, these diagrams are several months out of date, but they're still looks largely like this, but a couple of things have changed, but this still gets the idea across. If you wanted to do this with the Power Platform, you can fake it out using that looping technique. You could fake it out by having one workflow, then call another, one flow call another flow to implement a stage, and have it at the end call back to the dispatcher to choose a different one. Basically, one business process might involve 5 or more flows. There's something better if you've got a premium license called business process flow. And this starts with you modeling out all of your business entities using the common data service. And once you've done that, you determine what the stages are. And once you've done that, you determine what data needs to be filled in at each one of those stages. And you kind of manually move from stage to stage. It's a step in the right direction, and you kind of need to start with the data before you can go any further. And obviously you need to pay for premium licenses, and it's not necessarily the simplest looking thing in the world, but it can be done if you've got a premium license for the Power Platform. Because this will involve model-driven Power Apps and business process flows and CDS entities. But yeah, you can do that. And then the other option is, of course, to use something like WEBCON. And let me jump over here and show you the process we've been talking about here in WEBCON BPS. So I have authoring, I have a manager review, I have a legal review, I have publishing, and I can publish it. That's pretty much it. But we can get fancier about this. Remember, we talked about the notion of when it gets to the legal department, the manager should still be able to cancel it. Let's go ahead and create an extra transition path. Let's call this cancel. And let's get a little fancier about this. So before I go a little bit further, let me show you what's going on. When we go to approve this, it's always being assigned to the legal department. Let's do this. Legal, yep, there we go. All right, I like that. But because, and this is just approve and reject. Okay, that's good. But when we get to the legal department, now we've got the option to reject it. Okay, let's go ahead and paint that red. If it's a question, well, that's kind of neutral. I'm going to leave that alone. Well, it's moving backwards, but in a happy way. I like color coding just because it helps users understand things a little bit better. All right, this I'm going to keep in gray, mainly because I would prefer that people not do this, but we need to be ready for it. So this cancel could be done. We'll move to canceled. But here's the deal. If it's reject or question or approve, I want the legal department to have those options. If it's cancel, I only want the manager to have those options. So let's open this up and let's go to paths. And for each of these paths, let's save this, by the way. Okay. I have the option of determining whether or not it is visible. So how about I do this? In order to cancel it, you need to be the manager. So if and then we go to context. If the current user, actually let's stick with IDs. If the current user is also the author's manager, and so for that I need context. And author, sorry, where is it? I'll find it in a moment. Nope. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going, instead of having it be the manager, I can hunt for this. It's there. I just can't find it at the moment. I'm going to say that the author is the one who can cancel it at any time. It's a little bit easier. So here I'm going to take, if the current user is the author, whoops, that's not quite right. There. If current user equals author, then yeah, absolutely display this. Otherwise, don't. There. And then for approve, it's a little bit different. Same kind of deal. We're going to have an if-then condition. And there will be an equals here. But in this particular case, we're going to have if the current user is one of a couple of different groups. Typically in this particular case, I care if the current user is in the legal department. Whoops, let's try that again. It's really important to choose it, not just point to it. If the current user is one of the legal department, then I am good and it occurs to me I didn't do that right. In fact, you know something? Where was it? We even got an easier thing. If the person was directly assigned the task, this is better because remember, I might calculate exactly who the lawyer is. So if the person who was assigned the task is equal to the current user, then we return positive. Otherwise, we return negative. So if you're the person that we assigned the task to, you see that button. It's only if you weren't assigned the task, but you still retain some privileges for it, that we do what we're talking about here. This allows me to make sure cancel is only seen by the author, and the other three options are only seen by the legal department. Because here I just copped out and assigned it to the whole department. If we were going to pick a particular lawyer using a formula, that would appear behind this line. You open it up and you would see extra steps. But basically, we keep it nice and clean. In this approve, you see whether or not we want to make this the default option, whether or not we require comments before moving on, whether who gets it, and if I want to add extra special actions that take place as we move from one place to another, that can all be done. Probably a bit more detail than you had in mind, but that's it. A user can read this and it's a lot more powerful than one might think. All right, so the call to action here is to try the design using stages. It's just a better way to think. Consider using tools and techniques that support stages. And even sequential paths can be a set of stages, each one with just one event and transition until you realize it could be more interesting than that. And then you just need to make changes. Even if you can't build with stages because you're not using software that understands them, you can still model and interact with users using Visio diagrams with them using stages and communicate using them because, again, users understand stages more than they understand sequential processes. And with that, let's open up the floor for questions and see what's going on.
Thanks
Hey,
for
what
a
do we
great
got?
Thanks for a great presentation, Mike. Yeah,
Oh, thank you.
based on the time, we're nearly out of time. I'm just going to take one or two quick questions and then we'll wrap it up. Is that okay?
Sure.
Great. And if anyone does have questions, I assume it's okay if they reach out to you, Mike. You
Of
have your
course.
contact details there. Great.
Absolutely.
One question is WEBCON something I subscribe to as a service, or is it
Oh,
software I install?
thanks for asking. Let's see. It's both, really. WEBCON is software that you can install on a server in your data center. If you're running SharePoint on premises or you're running, actually, you don't have to be running with SharePoint. You can run as entirely, it's a software you install and you can buy it or subscribe to it. So pay one price at one point or subscribe to it on a monthly basis. That's option number one. Option number two is to kind of do the same thing, but to do it in Azure. So it's in the cloud, but it's still in a lockdown dedicated mode for you. And the third option is, yeah, we're finishing up our software as a service offering. So you can just subscribe to us in the cloud and start using us. And again, we embed nicely inside of SharePoint. Let me go back here to the example. This is looking at WEBCON in a standalone way. Here is looking at WEBCON operating completely inside of SharePoint. Here is a WEBCON process being used entirely inside of Teams. So essentially, it looks like a Teams, behaves like a Teams app, or behaves like a SharePoint app, or behaves like a standalone app. You can buy it or subscribe to it. You can use it in the cloud or use it on premises. You can curate the assets yourself, either in virtual machines or real machines, or just subscribe to it and we'll take care of everything.
Great. Mike, I'm going to wrap it up there. We're out of time if that's okay with you.
Obviously, sure.
Brilliant. On
Thanks,
behalf of the
everyone.
EHPC community, thank you, Mike, and everyone for taking the time today, especially getting up so early for us, Mike. We really do appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Great. Thank you also, everyone. This is the end of the webinar today. Don't forget our Teams discount, and please see sharepointeurope.com for further details on all upcoming webinars, or visit our resource center where all previous episodes are available. Thank you for joining us today, and a big thank you again to Mike Fitzmaurice. Take care and goodbye.